Hi, I'm Katrina McLarin, and this is my podcast, The Last Resort. In this series, I'll be talking about our journey and the restoration of Casa Nova House, a stately heritage-listed mansion built in 1861, located in the small town of Oamaru in the South Island of New Zealand. This is a story of how we changed our entire lives, trusted our gut, and took a leap of faith to live our dream. Well, welcome back to the Last Resort podcast. This should actually be our last episode in the series of Casa Nova House and the journey. We're entitling this one New Home in Italian. Casa Nova, a man who has many lovers, is often mistaken as the meaning behind Casa Nova House, but the reality is the original owner had a real affinity with Italy, and it was named after a new home in Italian. So that kind of sets the tone for the journey. When we bought Casa Nova House, we'd made a decision that we were going to keep the name, obviously Casa Nova. At that stage, we didn't know about its varied history, and we did float the idea of actually changing it. In hindsight, I'm so pleased we didn't. I think that would have been a very big mistake on our behalf to have done that. As I say, we were quite naive and we didn't understand the meaning of the name. In fact, I think a real estate agent had told us that it was actually to do with the Casa Nova, the man with the many lovers. But we subsequently found out it wasn't the actual real meaning behind the house. And in some ways, even though it has a better spin on social media, that it was perhaps a raucous party house, the reality is, I think for us, I think it never felt like that in the home. So it made more sense that it was actually, had an Italian meaning to it. Inception was originally a family home. And it was a family home for many, many years until it sort of had a slight change of use to allow for a hospitality factor. But still, the previous owners did live on site like we do now. We always think of it first and foremost as our home. The thing that to take into consideration when you're thinking about the name for your business is to make sure that you actually, number one, you register that name and that you lock down the social media side of the business. Even if you're 2 years away from opening it, as we were, we knew that we needed to register the name Casa Nova, get the website, get a Facebook page, and make sure that an Instagram, and make sure that we had the variation of our own name that tied in with our business. And that needed to make sense. We always wanted to differentiate the restaurant. Maybe in hindsight, we should have just called that Casa Nova as well. But we sort of did feel that we should have that slightly different because in effect, we did want to run these as two separate businesses that weren't necessarily reliant upon the other to be able to open or succeed. And that's actually the way that it's worked out. So the downstairs restaurant, we actually called that Restaurant 1861. For those of you who don't realise, that's obviously named after the year of the house. The main dining room itself, I think I've mentioned before, is called the Champion Dining Room, and that was named after the original owner, Mark Noble's horse. So we do actually have, I think, quite a wicked sense of humour. Long before we opened, we locked down those names. We locked down Restaurant 1861. As far as a Facebook page, we did and ah a lot around, do we give the restaurant its own website versus falling under the banner of Casa Nova House? In the end, we decided that it actually made more sense financially to give it a sort of a banner under Casa Nova, that we have one website, but we could direct the traffic to that particular page if we needed to. Big thing is to lock down the name. What's the name of your business? Get the social media stuff locked down. You don't have to create any major things to go on those platforms. You just need to make sure that you've got the name and that it's operational and that no one else can take that. The next big thing I think for us was to really work out, okay, what is it that is our offering? I think you need to be very clear by the time you go to market that you know what it is that your product is, how you want to deliver that product, and how are you going to package that product so that it's appealing to people. For this first part, I'm going to focus maybe a little bit more on the B&B side of the business. We always knew that with the bed and breakfast that is how we wanted to put it in the market. We did discuss it being potentially a lodge in the very beginning, but my thought was really around expectation of service, that the moment you tag the word lodge onto something, you are straight away, you could be actually setting yourself up for a little bit of failure if you can't deliver on the customer service side of things. So for a lodge, you need to be able to really provide breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And there is a much higher expectation around service. Ironically, we probably provide over half of the lodge service style of things, but we always wanted to over-deliver on every element of what our offer was to the market. So we always knew we wanted to be the top end of the bed and breakfast. And basically what that entailed was just that, literally you're providing a bed for the night and you're providing breakfast included in the tariff. Really difficult thing that we had was just trying to decide what our actual tariff was going to be. As I say, you need to understand what it is that you're going to deliver to people. We knew what the rooms were going to look like. We know what the product is we're offering from within those rooms, from the things of having the mini bars, the high-end toiletries, all those types of little things add into what you're presenting as far as your package. When we started to sort of put everything together and we were writing down, right, how is this going to look to a customer? How are we going to present it? It was decided that we really were going to stay in that B&B category. And our focus would purely be on making sure that everything that we did was to the highest level. But we also had to look in our immediate area and say, right, well, who do we think our competition is? So we really only got in this particular market. There's probably only one other that we could go head to head with as such, but the other one is marketed as a lodge. So that's slightly different again because they're going to provide a different level of service. Ironically, we both have a Qualmark 5-star gold rating. For those of you who don't know, Qualmark is actually basically it's New Zealand's tourism official mark of quality. So when we first opened, we actually had a Qualmark silver, and when we were originally assessed, the assessor wouldn't put us in the B&B category. He said that we were too good. It had to go into boutique and lodge. So in my mind, I've always felt that we fell under the boutique part of the lodge category, if that makes sense. Just because I have a hotel background and I did understand the level of service with the lodge. So we didn't actually achieve the gold status until our last assessment. And that was interesting as well because from our silver assessment, the first assessment we had an understanding of what we needed to achieve and where we needed to go to be able to get gold. And we weren't that far off, but we weren't quite there. So it was good to be able to have a goal to strive towards, to achieve. And for us, it really was around maybe a little bit more of the environmental sustainability practices that went into play as far as the house was concerned. Also, the assessor didn't actually realise at the time, but we do have a charitable element. Very early on when we bought Casa Nova House and the renovations were sort of coming to an end, we were approached by the organisation Look Good, Feel Better. They provide free services for any person with cancer at any stage of going through that process. So they basically organise wellness programs and do a whole heap of ranges of different things for skincare and makeup classes. And it's something that's provided free for patients going through this process of cancer. They had just recently found out that where they had been holding these meetings, they were going to need to start charging them to use the space. And obviously they're a free organisation. They're sort of doing this as their charitable thing. They get cosmetic companies to actually sponsor part of these classes and they provide the products. So really they needed somewhere to provide a venue and so that's what we did. We provided a venue for them to use for their meetings free of charge and we provided tea and coffee and things like that. We wanted to make people's experiences going through cancer as nice as we could possibly make it in conjunction with Look Good, Feel Better. My grandmother had died of cancer. I don't think there'd be many people that wouldn't be able to say that their lives haven't been touched in some form by cancer. So for me, it was a no-brainer that we were going to donate the space and some of our resources here for them to be able to do that. We later found out through the assessment process, which was a bit further down the line, we needed to have at least some type of charitable element to what we did. You know, we were able to say, well, actually, we do this. It just never occurred to me at the time that would also have a spin-off in a different way. For us, it was just a bit more genuine of about, well, look, hey, here's the space. We don't use it during the day. You feel free to do so. We would be only too happy for you to do that. Having that goal of the 5-star gold dangling like a little carrot was really exciting for us, and we can report that we were actually Oamaru's first property to be awarded a 5-star gold status. So for us, that was a combination of many years of hard work and restoration and trial by error and sometimes costly mistakes. It was sort of validation in a way that what we had done was being recognised that it was of the quality that we thought it was. So many times you get told that not necessarily what you think in your head is actually correct. So it was nice to have that level of validation. It was rewarding, and it was good for Brenda as well, and it was good for the people that work for us. We've had the same housekeeper since we first bought Casa Nova House, and I think I might have mentioned that in an earlier podcast of how we came about to have Pauline. And we're very fortunate that she's still with us today and does an incredible job and forms part of our very small, effective team. That mark of quality down the line now is certainly something that was very good to help us with our social media and branding. And so that logo from Core Gold actually appears on our website. It's on our email signatures. You're not smart if you're not putting that everywhere that you can possibly put that. But when we first opened, of course, we didn't have any of that. So for the first year until we reached a point of assessment, and of course we're going in and out of COVID, so things are opening and closing like a yo-yo. That was something that we had to become a member of to be considered with Cormark. The first year, that was, by the end of the first year, that was a pretty tough decision to have to make. But around that time, Tourism New Zealand as well were giving discounts for you to actually join and to be able to do that, because they understood that we were in a period of time of COVID and things were difficult for a lot of people. The real big thing there is to make sure you are on Tourism New Zealand, get yourself assessed, or at least get yourself scheduled, the property to be accessed. Understand what it is you are and what you're going to offer to the market as far as your product. One thing that we didn't do at the very beginning, and this was our naivety, and we didn't really understand that we needed to, and that was that we didn't go forth or open with, sort of trade-ready documents. And trade-ready documents is something that you're going to present to your inbound operators. And that's something maybe that should have been brought up a little bit with Tourism Waitaki in the very beginning. We've had great support from Tourism Waitaki. They came to see us at the house and we sat down, and it was mentioned to us about other providers and maybe connections that we could make within the community. But I think at the time, we and them both looked at us being more a restaurant than the B&B. So we were probably looking at tying up more suppliers that were local and different ways we could tap into things, rather than also, really hitting the bed and breakfast side of things. So that's something that I think in hindsight, I wish that I'd been more proactive about, because I just didn't have the knowledge to understand, okay, to go to market, you need to have these documents. And your trade-ready documents, I have found out obviously now, and we've prepared them, is you need to have for each rate season your updated fact sheet. It needs to have a trade manual, which is a manual on your property that any agent could pick up in the world and be able to understand what it is that you have on offer for a client of theirs to stay with you. And you need to have contracted rates that last from the 1st of April to the 31st of March the following year, and an image library and a way to link that library to present to agents. So there's documents like that we didn't actually have for, nearly the first 2 years, because we didn't really understand that we needed to. So I think that also maybe slowed us down from being in front of a lot more people a lot quicker, because it did feel like with the bed and breakfast, it was a little bit slow to really take into the market, even though we did get a certain amount of publicity also around the completion of Casa Nova House. We had an official opening with Heritage New Zealand, through their Heritage magazine. There was quite a big story in there about that. We were also in the Koru magazine with Air New Zealand. There was in Stuff as well, Stuff articles. So there was good media coverage of what we'd sort of done and how we'd stumbled across doing it. But it didn't necessarily mean that it translated into immediate bookings in your property. That definitely takes time to build. You need those reviews. The reviews are sort of what starts to put your property forward. Around that as well, you sort of need to create an online presence. And how to do that, that wasn't necessarily the first thing that we were successful at all. That's something that I think, and even now, we could still improve upon. But we had created our social media, especially Facebook and Instagram. We had created a website, so we made sure we locked down that domain. We set up accounts with Booking.com, Expedia, Airbnb, I must say Airbnb is probably not our strongest avenue, because obviously we're looking to rent the rooms more like a hotel than definitely, a whole of house hire. Obviously we don't do that unless it's a wedding or something that we can actually control. So once you sort of had set yourself up on those platforms, we did put a bit of money into Facebook advertising as well, and different areas that were sort of within that 3-hour radius, sort of Christchurch, Dunedin, across to Queenstown. So we did spend a bit of time marketing in those key areas of, trying to get a name there to hit the New Zealand drive market. At the time, remember, we're in COVID still. The tourists that you're really going to get, and this is another reason why I think the inbound fell off the radar for us. We opened in COVID. The only people that were really in the country doing any sort of tourism were domestic New Zealanders. So we also spent some money up in Auckland as well, advertising up there in Wellington. We tried to hit key sort of markets to figure out, right, okay, where's the likelihood that these people are going to come from, and what are they going to want to experience while they're here? We also did, a social media promotion, a giveaway, where we were very fortunate that a lot of local providers, even the Dunedin airport, arranged a donation of a return airfare. From Auckland, actually, the winner turned out to be. So we were able to create a complete prize as such, with us as the accommodation and an experience. We also had a hire car that was comped. So there was about 8 or 9 different providers that were very generous in donating their particular business type towards this. So that worked really well as well, to create a bit of buzz online and a bit of social media hype, and trying to create the awareness. So I think even now that's still something that we need to continue to work upon, and it's certainly not going to be an overnight thing. And it has proven not to be. There are times when, like especially in winter, the off-season for us is definitely very quiet. We can go for periods of time of over a week, 2 weeks, where we won't see a guest. And we've come to expect that's what sort of happens in the winter, and especially in the market where we've set our rates at. One thing that we realised is that when we first opened, we tried to appeal our rates more towards what we thought would be a sort of, middle to higher end New Zealand domestic tourists that would want to actually come and stay here. A property like this is also going to appeal to someone maybe a little bit older in the demographic, trying to understand what our product not just was, but how would it appeal to a tourist who is wanting to visit this area. And for that, we sort of came to the determination that really it's going to be a slightly older traveller, probably 40s up, has a reasonable disposable income, and even a traveller that perhaps was looking for a heritage experience. One of the wonderful reasons you visit Oamaru is because it has the most intact Victorian streetscape in the whole of New Zealand. Tapping in on that element, and we happen to be the oldest stone building in Oamaru and the oldest stone mansion in the Waitaki district. So we sort of fit into that brief of, well, okay, here's this fantastic heritage element, and you can come and stay and be a part of this. So that was something that I think we worked really hard on, as far as trying to put our best foot forward and get ourselves on all these platforms. The other thing is you need imagery to be able to put yourself on there. It's all very well to create an account on booking.com or even your own website, but you need images to sell the product. The very beginning, we sort of took some photos, but they were never as good as a professional is going to be able to take them. So, of course, we did bring in a professional for Casa Nova to take some images. They will look at things in a different way. If you ever question, why would you spend that money on a photographer? Well, let me tell you why you would. And, if you're not a photographer, and I'm certainly not, but I'm a novice, a good novice on my iPhone, your look and what you're looking for, a photographer will see something slightly different, and they'll see it from an artistic point of view. And you can see the difference between the pictures I took and the pictures that our photographer, Emma, actually took. Quite incredible. You could see that she was capturing more of the artistic elements of our rooms. It wasn't just a picture, well, here's the bed. And people want more than that these days. Years and years and years ago, when I first started out in hospitality and accommodation, it really was just, here's the picture of the bed and this is what the bathroom looks like. There wasn't the element of the romance or the artistry that you were trying to sell. Now you're really, really trying to sell a feel and a look. And it's very hard to capture as a novice. One thing I'd absolutely recommend is that it's worth spending the money to have a professional photographer take your imagery. So once you have that imagery and you have the rights with your photographer to use it in whatever form you want to use, as far as, your website and so forth. You're then sort of set to start to create a look and feel for the product. And for us, we used the same. If this was going to be the bedroom shot of the McMillan chamber, well, then this is the shot we used, and we were consistent with that right across every platform. So the website, booking.com, Expedia, Google, we tried to make sure that there was a uniformity to everything, and that every time you did look at an image, that you were taking away something from it, or creating some type of look or feeling. And for us, we wanted that to be quality and an experience that was a little bit different, because we can all put in fabulous beds in our rooms and do things like that, but what's going to make this stay different from any other that you're going to experience, especially like in our local market? For us, it was always going to be the heritage element and the tag of that, the stone building. The images that your guests are actually taking, hopefully they're all positive ones, and they're going to share it on their platform, especially if they start tagging it in with your name. It starts to spread, and that starts to create this online presence. And with positive reviews, it's really important to work on every element and try and win every guest over. Whether it's your first or your 500th, every guest should be treated as though they're exceptionally special in the king and queen, because their reviews do have an impact upon your business and your ranking and your placement. So it's really important that you're providing that same level of consistent service right across the board. And that doesn't matter what business type you're running, whether it's accommodation or restaurants like we do. And it's hard sometimes to do, because not every guest is always going to be, a dream guest to deal with. We've been very fortunate that we've had some wonderful people that have come and stayed with us. The only time that I questioned perhaps a couple of guests that we had, I was working with some people to try and stimulate our online rates and to try and keep that going. Originally we were doing a dynamic rate process that meant if there was a demand in the area, the rates would increase or decrease, and so that the rates could fluctuate. Now I prefer a much static approach, that this is our rate here, and then if we're gonna do any promotions, it's going to be up to us to then create a discount code. But one thing we did, and I ummed and ahed about it because we weren't getting a huge amount of traction, we were talking about doing a heavily discounted rate on booking.com. And I was absolutely adamant I did not want to do it. And I got talked into doing it because, we didn't have great occupancy. Brenda was also of the opinion, well, we're better to have some than none. I was concerned, and I was proven right by this, that sometimes if you're not paying a premium for a product, you tend to disrespect the product. I'm not saying that's the case with all people, but sometimes if you're in a property that you wouldn't normally stay in, if you save for it, that's different, because your perception is you're going to be so happy to be there because you want to be there. I think that if you discount your product too much, you attract a market that maybe doesn't actually care about your product. They just want it. They think, that's a great deal, and they don't care about how they treat your product. And I certainly noticed that, and stupid little things it reflected in. For example, putting hot cups on antique sideboards. Things like that tell me the clientele that was attracting is not our type of clientele, because they didn't understand fundamentally how to respect other people's things. Ever since, I will not do what we ever did then, and that was to discount to a point that I felt it changed the demographic of our market. It's really hard. You're trying to find this fine line of juggling and stimulating attraction to your product, but you don't want to devalue your product to a point that it doesn't make sense and people don't know how to treat it. So we've learnt the hard way a couple of times on that, certainly once with a couple of guests, and once with a wedding that we did where I had discounted the product for them to be able to use it, and I'll never do it again. Absolute nightmare, and still to this day they actually owe us money. So I'll never ever do that again. If people can't afford to be there, they probably shouldn't be. And I know it sounds terrible, but actually it's just a fact, because they won't treat it in the same way. That was a hard lesson for us to learn, because, you want to appeal to everyone and you want to try and be nice and do the right thing by people. We learnt that not everyone wants to do the right thing by you. So that was a hard lesson to learn. So now we will not discount beyond a certain point. And I think that's definitely the right move. We know what we are now, and we know where we want to sit in the market, and we know who I believe our market is. It took us a little while to get there, but if you can get there and really get a sense of feeling for that, then don't undersell your product. Keep your product where you want it to be. It's very hard to go back up if you've pigeonholed yourself in a place. For example, if you've always marketed yourself as, let's just throw out some numbers, as a $200 product, and then a year later you want to make yourself a $500 product, well, that's not going to work, because the problem is people won't see the value. They can't justify the value. Where was the value? So for us, it was always important that we get to a place where we were comfortable with our rates, that you were getting what you were paying for, and that was a quality experience. So now our rates are at the moment, and I think in our high season rates, around that $550 mark. We're comfortable where that offering is. So with that, and determining the offering, was to actually understand, okay, well, what is the guest going to get for this experience? Obviously, we have complimentary internet, we have complimentary toiletries, we have free car parking on site, and we also include a gourmet breakfast for each person. So that rack rate will include breakfast for two, and it includes all of those elements. That's the other thing when you're determining your rate and determining your value. You need to understand, actually, what is it costing you to produce this. So you need to know what your cleaning costs are. For us, it made more sense commercially to hire in our linen. And a couple of reasons behind this. We only have 3 guest rooms. For us, we'd have to put in a commercial laundry to be able to cope with producing the linen, because you have to be able to think of it. Number one, you have to store enough linen on site for, some people might work on 2 or 3 day changes. So you need to be able to do your entire venue and have enough linen stores to be able to change over for 3 days, or when it is you can get a next order in. So we worked on 3 days for us. But to try and do all the linen that you'd need to do, you'd have to bring in commercial washing machines. Okay, we could do that. But where were you going to put the rollers to be able to iron everything? So for us, number one, we didn't have enough storage to be able to do that. The other thing to factor in is the labour. So who is going to stand there and actually, iron every single pillowcase, every sheet? So all of these things we sat down and we worked out, and we just didn't think that it made sense for us on 3 rooms to put in a commercial laundry. So what we did is we factored into our rates the cleaning costs. So the cleaning costs aren't just that of an hourly rate for someone to actually physically clean. It's also the cleaning products that they're using. Also, the linen hire costs went in. The toiletry costs goes in. If you're providing complimentary tea, coffee, anything that's free that a guest is getting, that needs to be included into your rate so you understand what's going to come out of it. So it's not just the cleaning element that needs to come out of your rack rate when understanding what your bottom line is. You also have the overall house costs to run. There is a gardener now. We didn't have in the very beginning, but honestly, both Brenda and I are quite time poor at the moment. So we had to bite the bullet there, but we actually have someone that's fantastic and does a great job. So we're very fortunate there. But there is a cost to that. There's a cost to the insurance to the house. There's also a cost to the heating. Big expense for us is the heating. So regardless of you having, 1 or all 3 rooms in, we've got to run the boiler system. Luckily, after the renovations, we can at least split it to downstairs and upstairs, but we've still got to run that. The common areas have to be warm. You can't sort of walk from your bedroom and be toasty into a hallway and that be 11 degrees inside the house. It's not going to give you a 5-star experience. Because we did put also heat pumps into each guest room, people can control the heating. So they potentially are running your heat pump. We know we've got to run the boiler. So these are all the elements in the house costs that are going in to formulate your rates and what you need to cover. So once you've worked all that out and what those annual costs are, and you can divide it down and get it down into a room cost per night, once you know what those costs are, that then I think really helps for you to determine your rates. There is absolutely no point in you opening up some type of business to charge $110 a night, for example, yet it's costing you $55 to clean the room. And are you providing breakfast for that $110 a night? Because you've got to take out then the cost of the breakfast, the cost of someone to stand there and make the breakfast, the cost of someone delivering the breakfast. So there's the labour element. It goes beyond just someone cleaning the room. So those are factors we need to also allow. I mean, Brenda and I, sure, we can offset the cost and labour as far as cooking the breakfasts ourselves, delivering it and all that side of it and that guest experience. It wouldn't be profitable for us, I think, if we weren't an owner-operator. Because if you had to staff someone here to potentially wait for a guest arrival and they don't show up until very late, 10 o'clock at night, you'd blow the cost out of your room rate for that night. And believe it or not, even though you set parameters of what check-in time you're open to, especially with a market that sometimes doesn't understand the communication. The Asian market's a perfect example of this. We once had guests show up at after 1 o'clock in the morning. Now, someone said to me, why on earth would you still take it? And I said, because that's the business we're in. We're in a business of hospitality. So unfortunately, things like that are going to happen. And as an owner, you've got to make that decision. Are you going to suck it up and do it? Or are you going to say no? And from our end, we're hospitality people. We're going to suck it up and do it. It mightn't always be, convenient to us, but that's element needs to be added into your rate as well, that you're catering for that. So you're going to provide a certain level of service that's going to see you go over and above. And I think that's really important. It was hard to actually determine the rate. As I said, we had one other property in Oamaru that would be comparable, but yet we are different. We're different in our approaches and we have different products, but similar. They're a lot more per night than we are. And they can justify their rate because they provide a different level of service. So I needed to think about it from the point of view of, well, would we feel like you're getting this, this product that you'd be comfortable paying this amount for, and work out all those costs? So it did actually take us a while to actually confirm the rate. It wasn't until actually 6 to 8 months ago that we went through our first, I suppose, significant rate increase. And that came about because the person at the time who was in charge of Tourism Waitaki's marketing and promotion actually sort of pointed out to us, because we had nothing to compare it to. You've got to remember this, as far as we hadn't done this type of property before, so we didn't have an accommodation property to look back and say, okay, well, here's our benchmark. And it took for an independent person coming in, going through the property and saying, you're insane, your rates are too low, look at X property around New Zealand, this is where you should be, you're in that same level. So that was a really big eye-opener for us. So Chrissy, if you're listening, thank you very, very much. That changed everything for us and how we presented ourselves. That also enabled us to make sure that we had all our trade-ready documents, that we are where we need to be since we opened. As I said, we didn't get there quickly for us, and that was a bit of ignorance on our behalf, actually a lot of ignorance, so I've got to accept that. We would never make that mistake again, and we've learned from this. That's the great thing too, is that you've got to continue to learn, evolve, but be open to listening. This is not something that we purported to be that we knew everything about. So we did learn it the hard way to a certain degree, but I now feel very comfortable. But I also feel that there's still more we need to know and learn about how to present and market ourselves. But I think the key thing is to get the fundamentals down. The service that you present on site is so critical. The first experience that people have with you is when they first meet you, whether that's down in the car park. When I know I've got a guest arrival, the one thing with having a metal driveway, you can, quite often hear people pull up. So I'll make sure I'm near in the house a window so that I will absolutely keep a lookout for a guest arrival. If I can, I try to actually get out there before they get up to the door to be able to greet them. I think it's always really nice to greet them at that first point and explain to them as you're walking in that, Casa Nova House, welcome, and built in 1861, and give them a little bit of the history. I think part of the stay here too is that people want to know that. They've chosen to stay with us, especially, I think, because there is that element of history to it. So they're going to have questions, answer them. Everything they want to do as far as their questions, they want to learn about the history of the house, take the time and show them and explain it. I think that's really important. We always offer to help carry guest luggage. There's things that we do like that, especially because we have stairs internally too. So sometimes with an older market as well, you don't want that to be off-putting to them, for them to think, how are we going to get our luggage up and down? It's all those little things and the courtesy things and the conversation that starts from the car park, and that begins their journey. Sometimes, too, I think people can be a little bit nervous. It can be quite daunting when you pull up to a property like this, and it sort of does maybe put you a little on edge as far as, straight away thinking this is a little bit different. We try to put everyone at ease immediately. We want them to feel comfortable and know that we want them here. I think there'd be nothing worse in the universe of paying good money and arriving somewhere and you weren't made to feel welcome. I think that'd be dreadful. I'd resent paying the money, and straight away it would set the tone for the stay, which I don't think would be an enjoyable one. The tone of the stay is set right from the very, very beginning, and you're sort of getting them into the house, explaining the history as you go. It's all those little bits and pieces, explaining about the lead light, the significance, the fact that it came out of the Oamaru mortuary. People want to know that sort of stuff. And you can tell from people too how far their engagement is. I think it's also an important skill to understand when to back off and know that perhaps now's not your moment to go into any further. You sort of let people's body language guide you in that way. You've got to also think that when they're coming to Oamaru, they've probably just driven from somewhere that's going to be an hour or up to 3 hours away. So you've got to be careful not to go on too far because they might want to use the bathroom. There's all these parts you've got to think about their journey. So all these elements, I think, all come together to help determine the whole product, the whole end user experience. We set a guideline for, breakfast between this time and that time. So normally it's 8 to 9:30, but we then make it to whatever time they want. They can tell us however they want their eggs. Do they want wholemeal toast? Do they want white? Do they want sourdough? So we give them options so that they feel like not only is their stays sort of a custom experience, so is their eating. They're getting exactly what they want at the time that they want it. And I always think, well, you couldn't ask for more than that. It doesn't get any better than that. The other thing is that we set the breakfast room upstairs, and I did mention this earlier in an earlier podcast. The reason we did that was not only to keep the two businesses separate, but also you don't want your guests to have to work any harder. Paying good money to be there, you want the experience for them to feel seamless. And a seamless experience is meaning they're just walking a few steps into a breakfast room. They're not having to go down the stairs and, exert any more energy than they need to. So all of these different parts all come into play when thinking about your whole product. But the marketing thing is just so critical. And I think as time goes on and we get more of a presence, especially with the inbound operators that are dealing with the international market, let's face it, the international market with the pound or the US dollar or even the Australian dollar, you're going to get a good holiday when you're visiting New Zealand and looking at those exchange rates, and you're going to get more bang for your buck. The other thing to think about when the rates is that element to it, because sometimes in your international market, they will perceive if your product is too cheap, the service and everything is not going to be up to the standard that they want. So you've got that real balancing act of trying to find a medium ground. And as I said before, I feel like we finally found that now, X numbers of years down the line. We're in the market where we should be at this point in time. So really important, once you sort of can get in, get your product Hallmark rated. It is important for people to understand. A lot of other countries work on rating systems. I don't know about you, but when I travel, I do look at Google and I definitely look at TripAdvisor and I do read reviews. And that helps to determine whether I'm going to stay somewhere, what restaurant I eat at, even parts of towns that we'll stay in. We look for the advice of others to do that. And I won't just base it off one review. I mean, I mentioned before I am a Virgo, so I'll probably read about 20 reviews to get an overall feel and experience of especially where we're going to stay. The other thing is to think about too, I touched on it before, but that image library is really important. To your agents, they probably only want to see 10 images. What is the bedrooms, the bathrooms, exterior, interior shots, but they need to be good enough shots in a higher quality that could potentially appear in any sort of brochure or marketing that they do at the other end. So that's why it's really important at the beginning, as I was saying, get consistent with the images that you use for your product. If this is McMullen Chamber, then this is going to be McMullen Chamber for everyone to use. So we're getting that consistent brand put across. The big thing is once you've got your online presence up, once you have your booking engines up, it's also important with our website and our booking channels that when we take bookings direct, we're actually with Little Hotelier that we use because we did need a professional reservation system. Even with 3 rooms, because you never want to potentially oversell a room. That could be the worst disaster that you could do. The other thing is that you have no commission on your direct rates. So any advertising that you do, like on Facebook or print advertising, you don't have to pay someone else a commission on top of that if someone's booked through your direct channel. And you need to also allow in your rates as well that potentially you could be paying up to 25% commission. So you need to factor that in. So there's all these different elements that need to be factored in for you to set a rate. And also, when I mentioned earlier, you're thinking about your house costs, but you're also thinking about your advertising costs. So there's so many different things that have got to factor in and you've got to allow a percentage for. And you need to allow a percentage for that to increase as well. We set our 24, 25 rates, we set them fixed because we'd increase them to fall in line with where we should fit within the market. But then I wanted to hold it. I wanted to hold it for that 2-year period before we looked at potentially a slight increase, because I wanted us to be sort of comfortable in the market and fall in a certain area. So with the house, I think, we're really proud of Casa Nova House, and I think it's a great achievement for both Brenda and I, also as a couple, of what we've been able to do here. For Casa Nova House and the accommodation side of things, I think it's now just a matter of maintaining. So as I mentioned, we're already back maintaining the actual house, but it's also important to maintain the online presence. And it's sometimes really hard on accommodation that you're not just repeating the same stuff over and over. So it is an area we need to work upon, that we get a little bit more traction and a little bit more posting on the accommodation side. But it is important to be in the marketplace and keep that consistency. With where we're sitting right now, I feel very comfortable with where we're heading, and I think it's only going to get better and better. The restaurant has proven to be an interesting beast. For the first 2 years, we traded Restaurant 1861. And then back in February, we were toying, just before Christmas actually of last year, and into February, we were toying with, do we temporarily close Restaurant 1861? We're not subject to foot traffic where we're located. The market was starting to die down. We could sort of see it. You got to remember, we've taken on at this point the Criterion Hotel. So there we're running it more as a restaurant. We're not doing anything on the accommodation side of that business because we don't believe it's to a good enough standard. There's no heating in the upstairs, and it's a shared bathroom situation, but not a great one. We're focusing there primarily restaurant. So restaurant there, it has the capability of 2 dining rooms, 50 capacity each, and up to 70 in the bar sort of snug area. So it's a reasonable sized site in comparison to Casa Nova that is up to 50 for a function, or 30 dining at any one time. Very different numbers, and so the capacity is much greater there. The foot traffic, it's in the right building, it's in the right location, in the Victorian precinct, it's the flagship building. So there's many different things. We're looking at the 2 of them. We're looking at the wage costs. The Criterion is a big wage cost because it's a bigger kitchen. It needs a lot more staff. She's a big beast. It needs a lot more staff to be able to run it. Casa Nova doesn't need as many staff, but the problem is if you have a bad night, you've got to eat up with wages, because I'm now at the Criterion and Brenda's at Casa Nova House. But we could see the market was dipping. At the end of last year, we were starting to talk about, is this going to be viable into next year? There was talk at that point of there being a recession. And sure enough, now, as I talk to you now, we're in the middle of one. And that's very noticeable in winter in the Criterion. We can see the numbers dropping there. I want to say it's probably tracking around about 23% down on where it was the same winter in last year. So those numbers, it may not seem huge, but they are really a lot, especially when you cannot necessarily control your payroll too much. You can streamline it, but there's only so far you can go, because you've still got to be able to offer a product and a quality one. Otherwise, you'll lose customers. So we had to make the tough decision over Christmas, Casa Nova House. We would stop trading to the public for Restaurant 1861. It was actually quite devastating in a lot of ways, because the dream was always to buy Casa Nova House for it to be a restaurant. So really ironically that it's more now the B&B than it is the restaurant, but that we'd keep doing private functions and events. So we haven't closed the restaurant forever, but it's definitely on hiatus at the moment. Everything is still sitting there downstairs, or the tables, the chairs, the tapas dishes, the full commercial kitchen, everything is just sitting there. It's now in a little bit of a time capsule. Even though the decision was a really tough one at the time, to give you a really good indicator of this, our insurance premiums for having a commercial operating kitchen restaurant in the building has gone from $18,000 a year to $7,500 a year by taking that element out of the business as such. So you're not talking little numbers, you're talking really big numbers that you could potentially save. So we made that tough decision, and X number of months down the line, I can 100% report it was the right thing to do. I think I didn't want to be in a situation, and Brenda and I discussed it, I don't think there'd be anything worse than someone else forcing you to make the decision to close your business. I think sometimes you've got to make the tough choice, but you need to stand back and be able to say, okay, the writing is just on the wall here for where this is heading in the next number of months. We need to make the decision now to tighten the belt and cut that there. Bearing in mind, we also have the Criterion. So we are still trading there. So the team, no one lost their jobs as far as Restaurant 1861 were concerned. They moved across to the Criterion, and as people naturally left, you just didn't replace them. And Brenda's gone to the Criterion, which is also great for us because it means there's real stability there in that commercial kitchen, which has been hard to sort of get as far as the stability side of it, where you're feeling 100% comfortable with everything that's being produced and you can stand by your product. That's not always easy to ascertain with consistency that you'd like. Sitting back now, where we're in July of 2024, I know that was the right decision. We're talking about now popping it back open for Christmas, and depending on staffing levels, we absolutely will. I mean, what we produce here, we did the tapas in a slightly different way. It's a fantastic product, and the quality of the product was really, really good, and people do ask me about that all the time. We do tapas now at the Criterion, but in a different way. It's not quite the same. Our head chef there is Thai, so there's a bit more Asian fusion to it, as where traditionally Brenda and I are more Mediterranean Spanish as far as the style and cuisine style. The one thing that I think is important to learn as far as the restaurant is we did exactly the same thing with the marketing as far as making sure the name was registered, that we needed to get the food imagery, that all of that was out there and keep pumping it. The thing is with our local market is a really interesting one and it's a tough one. They have their favourite places that they like to go to, but in winter, everyone hunkers down here. You know, at 5 o'clock, they're at home and the fire's going. You can't blame them for that because it is cold. People don't necessarily have a tendency to want to go out and spend in the same way in the winter months. And we always knew that. We watched that the first year, which is why we diversified by doing the bed and breakfast in the first place. But we sort of felt on top of a recession, which we're seeing at the Criterion now, people just aren't spending the ready money like they once did. Like you'll go and I don't think people lose their $6 coffee, but they may not be necessarily buying a muffin. I always thought a good benchmark in the market was if women stop getting their hair done as frequently, then you know things are not, the economy is really slowing down. And it is slowing down at the moment. You can certainly feel it. The banks aren't really lending. And also, you know, people are more mindful of what they're spending their money on. So for the, you know, that sort of dinner, that $100 dinner, that's going to go out the door. We're going to be the first thing that sort of tends to go. As I say, hindsight, I'm really pleased that we made that decision. To suspend operations here. We're still obviously trading the bed and breakfast. That's still full steam ahead. That was maybe the wonderful thing about keeping those two entities separate was that if one, like it, and we never intended for it, but if one stops, the other can still keep going. And that would work in the reverse as well. So I'm comfortable that that's the right decision. We will reopen it, I'm almost positive, for Christmas. The only thing that will stop us doing that is if I don't have the staffing levels. That's the other thing that is really hard to think about. When you come to a more rural market, it is really difficult. You don't have a large population base to draw upon. So it's really difficult. You can't always get fully qualified chefs or the people that you may want to get. Or if you do, you can't keep them for long periods of time because they want to keep moving on. And we've noticed that certainly. We can't compete with the hourly rates of Queenstown. And we've lost several staff actually to Queenstown. But we've also had some very good local staff. It's a hard market. You know, there's not chefs growing on trees down here. And what I'm noticing, which is really, maybe in some ways it's really bad for our industry type, but so many chefs are leaving the industry. The love of hospitality is changing. They've realised they probably can earn more money somewhere else. They don't necessarily have to work nights. It's losing, I think, a little bit of the allure that, you know, and it's hard. It's hard to get good quality chefs and staff that still want to work in hospitality. Both Brenda and I treat hospitality as a profession because it is our profession. But there's a lot of people that don't. It's like a transient work job and, you know, they're going through university or it's their first job from high school. So that's also difficult. But we don't mind spending the time and the investment in training young people. We've actually just taken on a new apprentice at the Criterion. And I think it's exciting. So you don't want to be in a position either where you're complaining about you can't get staff, but then you don't spend any money on the investment of creating them. So that's the one thing that I've realised here in Oamaru, that if you can, it's money well spent, especially in the time that it takes to train someone, to train them the way you want them to be in your kitchen. It's worth putting the investment in. And it's rewarding watching young people grow and how their skills develop. It's really, really rewarding. We've now had, I think, 4 or 5 different sort of apprentices that we've sort of gone through that whole process with. Our last apprentice is up in Auckland, finished up with us when we finished Poco Loco, and they're now working at Braku. I could not be any prouder, which is a fabulous fine dining cuisine restaurant in the Bombay Hills. So things like that makes me really proud. Our chef from Poco Loco also, went across and competed in Spain. So we've been really fortunate that we've had some really great people along the way that have also assisted us with our journey. It's definitely a team effort. You don't just get there on your own. Especially with a restaurant, it does take a village to make it happen. The front's got to work, the back's got to work, it's all got to work together. So with the restaurant side of things, I think it's really important, and the toughest decision you can make is to not trade it. That was the right decision. It probably sounds like a silly story, but about 1.5 years ago, we went and stayed at Eliza's Manor in Christchurch. And that was really eye-opening for us. Ironically, the building was built the same year as Casa Nova House, 1861. And then I read recently that actually they'd gone into liquidation. They were lovely, lovely people. Actually, the wife was from the same hometown in Sunderland as Brenda, and it worked out they went to the same high school 2 years apart. And in their peak point, they had 13 different restaurants. Her and I were having a conversation when we were staying there, and we thoroughly enjoyed our stay too, I might add, around about, of me letting go of Poco Loco at that stage. And she gave me some actually really good advice. To me, Poco Loco was like the flagship. I didn't want to give it up. Brenda, happily to give it up, but she didn't have that same sentimental attachment to it that I did. But she gave me some really good advice and understanding that it was okay to cut the cord. And had we not had that conversation, a year prior, I don't think I would have been in the position where I would have made the decision about Restaurant 1861 with Brenda. I probably would have been more resistant to that change. I'm so pleased I did. And unfortunately, that business has been forced into liquidation. And I feel really sorry for them because I can see how you could get there, wanting to keep something alive that you've worked so hard on. But I think the important thing is when you employ different people, and in our peak, we were employing over 35 different people between the 3 different restaurants. You take on a level of responsibility when you're responsible for someone else's income. And I wear that really keenly. I'm very aware of that. I would rather see, Brenda and I not get paid before there'd ever be an issue when it came to, paying your bills or your staff. All of those elements were playing in my head. And I realized too that it was okay to say, you know what, at this point in time, this is not working the way that we want it to work. We need to put a pin in it and just say, right, let's put this on hold over here, and then we're going to pick it back up when it makes sense to do so. Something that I've been asked a bit lately, especially when I'm on the bar at the Criterion and pouring a drink and we're fixing the woes of the world, is, it's terrible to see how many well-known restaurant names and venues have actually gone into liquidation in the last few months. And people are sort of like, well, why is it now? And it's really quite simple. To survive COVID, any successful operator had to use up their reserve cash to be able to do it. We used up all the leeway that we could with the banks to be able to survive it. So if we're still standing now, that's because that's what we had to do to survive. Unfortunately, like anything in the world, you don't then predict that we're going to turn around and then have this great recession that we're now facing in winter. So it's kind of like a double whammy. So that is why there is no question in my mind that we made the right decision to suspend operations at Casa Nova House with Restaurant 1861. It was 100% the right move in this economic climate. If I could give any business owner any bit of advice, no matter what business field you're in, don't be afraid to make those tough decisions, because actually indecision is the killer. The indecision to make a decision is where you start stalling out processes and things get worse and they get worse because you keep thinking it's going to get better and it's going to get better. Well, it doesn't always happen like that. Make a decision. If it's a mistake, you can always correct it. But the indecision gets you nowhere and you're just like a little hamster in a wheel. So for us, it's been an incredible journey as far as Casa Nova, and one that is still ongoing. Will I pick up the podcast for Casa Nova, the journey in the future? Maybe. Let's see down the line when we have a little bit more of a journey on the other side of this recession in New Zealand to talk about. But I think the important thing to step away from as far as a business is concerned, understand your product, understand how you want to market it and your placement, know what it is you want to achieve, Do your best to achieve it, and don't be afraid to take side steps. As I say, indecision's the killer. Keep making positive steps. Keep trying to maintain also, I think, an air of positivity. When I look at our journey from Casa Nova since 2019, there have been so many roadblocks put before us, which we could have just stopped that and said we're not going any further. But we kept climbing over them. And I think that's the important part. Keep climbing over the roadblock, keep moving forward, maintain an air of positivity, and don't be afraid to ask opinions of others or ask for advice. Never stop learning, never stop growing. Everything's achievable. We'll continue on. Restaurant 1861 will resurrect again. Meanwhile, Casa Nova House, the boutique bed and breakfast, will continue on. Fingers and toes crossed for the next hallmark assessment that we maintain. I feel really confident that we will. And as we're going forward, we can only actually grow and become better operators. I want to greatly thank everyone for joining us on the journey of Casa Nova House and its renovations. It's been an absolute delight to record this podcast. It's been a lot of fun. At times I haven't always found the time to be able to do the recordings, but we've got there in the end. And I noticed today is the 24th of July, 2024, and today it popped up on my calendar that on this day 5 years ago, we actually settled the purchase of Casa Nova House. So it's incredible to think what a journey we've been on both personally and professionally. And honestly, we wouldn't change a thing about it. The Last Resort podcast will return at some point in the future and we'll focus on a different topic. So thank you very much for listening. Until then, take care and we wish you nothing but the best. To see Casa Nova House, go to our website www.casanovahouse.co.nz or check us out on Facebook or Instagram. You've been listening to the Last Resort podcast with Katrina McLarin.